A cold night by the river. On a freezing night in early March, when gusty winds from the nearby river swept through the small riverside town, I, Elias Carver, trudged home after a long, exhausting day at the shipyard. It was nearly midnight when I pushed open the heavy wooden door of the two-story house that Clara, my wife, and I had called home for the past 5 years. Today's work had been especially grueling. Repairing an old fishing boat with a rusted engine and splintered planks, leaving every muscle in my body aching. I wanted just one thing, to grab a cold beer from the kitchen fridge, sink into the old smooth leather armchair in the living room, and let the silence soothe my mind, swirling with stress. That's exactly what I did. The cold beer hissed as I popped it open, and its mildly bitter taste felt like a small reward after a long day. I didn't turn on the lights or the TV right away. Just sat there, eyes closed, feet resting on the faded carpet, trying to brush aside worries about money, bills, and the ever-shrinking forest of customers. Outside, the wind howled through the thorny trees by the riverbank, blending with the soft lapping of waves, creating a strange nighttime symphony I had grown familiar with. I lazily flipped through a few TV channels after finally turning it on, but there was nothing worth watching, just meaningless ads and mindless programs. Frustrated, I turned the TV off, deciding to enjoy the rest of my beer in peace. But that peace didn't last long. Just a few seconds later, a sudden surge hit, and all the lights in the house went out. The ceiling light, the TV, even the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen, all vanished, leaving me in complete darkness. I sighed, frustrated. This old house often lost power, especially on windy nights like this. The nearby river always seemed to bring chaos along with its currents. My first reaction was to stand up, grab the coat by the door, and step outside to check if the whole neighborhood was affected. I shut the door carefully, hoping to preserve a bit of warmth inside in case the blackout lasted. The cold night bit into my skin, my breath turning to wisps of white under the faint moonlight. I walked quietly down the still street. Most houses were pitch black, but a few still glowed with warm yellow light through their windows. So it was just my house with the problem. I frowned, taking a deep breath, feeling a headache beginning to build. My rare moment of relaxation was officially ruined. I turned back, planning to re-enter the house to investigate, but when my hand twisted the doorknob, it didn't budge. I froze, confused. I tried again, harder, but the door was clearly locked from the inside. "What the hell?" I muttered, breathing faster. I knocked on the door, calling loudly, "Clara, are you in there?" "Open the door." No answer, just the sound of wind whistling across the roof. I pressed my face against the small glass pane, trying to see inside, but the darkness was thick as ink, with no signs of life. Panic began to rise. I ran around to the back door, my shoes slipping on the damp frost in the yard. The back door was also locked tight. This was highly unusual. Clara always left the back door unlocked, a habit I usually complained about, but now terrified me when it no longer held true. I rushed to the side of the house, where the fuse box was mounted on the wooden wall. And then I stopped. The garden hose I had coiled neatly that morning now lay unraveled on the ground, right beneath the fuse box. A chilling thought sliced through me. This wasn't a natural power outage. Someone had tried to cut the power. Without another thought, I ran to the nearest living room window, pressing my face to the cold glass, trying to peer through the darkness. This time, I found them. 2 beams of flashlight light darting inside the house like frantic fireflies. Someone was rummaging through our things. I froze, rage overtaking fear. They broke into our house not even 5 minutes after I left. But then, a more horrifying thought chilled me further. Clara was still inside. She was surely asleep upstairs, unaware, still completely helpless. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone to call the police, but my fingers met emptiness. I cursed myself. The phone was still on the armchair, right where I'd left it with my beer. With no other choice, I considered running to the Harper's house, the elderly couple who lived a few houses down, to borrow their phone. But I couldn't leave Clara behind. I looked up toward the second-floor bedroom window, took a deep breath, and mustered every ounce of strength I had. 1 knock, 2 knocks, then a third. Finally, the window creaked open. Clara, her hair messy and eyes sleepy, poked her head out. Before she could ask anything, I whispered urgently, "There are intruders in the house. Hide in the closet now. Don't come out." She nodded, face pale, and disappeared from the window. I ran to the Harpers, pounding on the door until the old man slowly answered. I babbled out the situation, borrowed their phone, and called the police. While waiting, I stood at the edge of our yard, watching the house, praying silently. 10 long minutes later, 2 patrol cars sliced through the night with flashing lights. I ran to them, breathless, quickly explaining everything to the first officer who stepped out. They drew their guns and split up, entering the house through both the front and back doors. I stood outside, fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my skin, praying Clara was still safe. When the police returned, they shook their heads. The intruders were gone, leaving the back door wide open and a ransacked home. My laptop, the living room TV, Clara's grandmother's jewelry box from the vanity, all missing. Clara emerged from the closet, trembling, and collapsed into my arms, sobbing. What she told me next made me both furious and proud to my core. Just seconds after hiding in the closet, she heard footsteps in the bedroom. One entered, their boots thudding against the floor in the still air. Silence. Silence. As if listening. Clara said she had never been so terrified. It felt like her heart wouldn't stop pounding. Her breath caught in her throat as she cowered behind the hanging clothes. Maybe my banging on the window had alerted them, forcing them to flee before checking the bedroom. But that didn't ease the guilt. I had left her alone in that house with people who could have been murderers just because I carelessly stepped outside. Police investigated the scene, concluding the wires in the fuse box had been snipped with cutters, a deliberate act. They asked if we had any enemies, but I couldn't think of anyone. It might have just been a random robbery, drifters along the river looking for an opportunity. Still, the unease didn't leave me. We continued living in that house by the cold river with no plans to move. But every night when the wind howls through the house, I can't stop thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't stepped outside at that exact moment. If I had stayed, would I have been able to protect Clara? Or would we not be here telling this story at all? Clara now double-checks the locks every night before bed, and I installed a security system even though it wiped out nearly all our meager savings. The house is still home, but it's no longer the haven it once was. And I, Elias Carver, still carry an unhealed scar, the pain of a man who couldn't protect the one he loved most when it mattered most. Night beneath the factory's shadow. I, Nathan Holt, live in a quiet little corner of the suburbs where tree-lined streets lead to low wooden houses bathed in the warm glow of yellow lights. But just a short drive away, you'll find yourself lost in busier towns where the pace of life never slows. A few months ago, I took a night shift security job at an old factory nestled in the middle of a vast industrial zone, 3 towns away from my home. The factory was a massive, gray structure with faded concrete walls and a series of silent smokestacks stretching toward the sky. Inside, towering steel shelves were packed with crates, and a few wide loading bays opened into the dark expanse beyond. My job was simple: patrol regularly, check the locks, make sure nothing was out of the ordinary. Every night was so quiet I could hear my own breathing, but I didn't complain. That solitude suited me, and most shifts passed without a single ripple. It was a Thursday night when the sky outside was torn open by heavy rain. I sat in the tiny security booth, a glass and steel box with a scratched wooden desk and a creaky swivel chair, occasionally glancing at my phone for storm updates. I hated driving home in weather like that. Slick roads and visibility close to zero. Luckily, there wasn't much to do that night. I could just sit back and let time pass. The lights in the factory flickered a few times, but the power held, so I wasn't too worried. Until about an hour later, when everything suddenly went dark. The power went out completely. A thick blanket of blackness fell, swallowing the factory's vast interior. I cursed under my breath, annoyed that I was the only one there that night. The responsibility of restoring power now fell on me, even though I'd never expected to deal with something like this. I left the security booth, taking with me a flashlight, the only source of light in this maze of steel and concrete. Its beam was weak, illuminating only a few feet ahead, leaving gloomy shadows clinging to every corner. The silence was suffocating. broken only by the rain hammering the roof and the echo of my footsteps on the cold concrete floor. I began the procedure my manager had taught me. Unplug the big air compressors before checking the main breaker at the end of the factory. But honestly, in that darkness, everything felt far more frightening than I'd imagined. Every creak of the building, maybe from the wind or rattling roof panels, made me jump. My footsteps echoed off distant walls, as if someone else was walking behind me. As I patrolled a passage between the shelving units, a sharp metallic clang echoed from somewhere deep inside the factory. I froze, heart pounding. I told myself it was just the storm, a wind-blown shutter, or a loose beam falling to the floor. Even so, I decided to check every aisle, both to fulfill my duty and to calm my nerves. I turned a corner and immediately stopped. A faint light was gliding along the shelves ahead, identical to my flashlight's beam. It vanished the moment I saw it, but I was sure I hadn't imagined it. No one was supposed to be here until the morning shift. My heart raced. A cold sensation ran down my spine. Someone else was in here with me. I thought about shouting, "Who's there?" But instinct told me to stay silent. I crept toward the spot where I'd seen the light, flashlight sweeping over dusty crates and empty steel racks. Nothing. The aisle was silent, not a soul in sight. But I knew I wasn't crazy. I had seen something. I considered calling the police, but wasn't sure if a fleeting light was enough to warrant an alarm. The company had only equipped me with a stun baton, not a gun or anything serious. In hindsight, if I had a real weapon, maybe I wouldn't have hesitated to call right away. I continued my patrol, trying to stay focused on the task. But then a strange smell hit my nose, musty, metallic, like rust mixed with stagnant water. It came from the loading bay, the darkest part of the factory, where towering crates formed unmoving walls. I pointed the flashlight in the direction of the smell, and its beam lit up the slick concrete floor, revealing two faint, wet footprints leading into a narrow aisle. In that moment, I wanted to turn and run straight for the exit, call the police and forget everything. But this was my job. If there was an intruder, I had to deal with it, at least figure out what was happening. Curiosity outweighed fear, and I decided to follow the trail. I lowered the flashlight, keeping the beam close to the ground to avoid revealing my position, my other hand gripping the stun baton tightly. As I drew closer, I began to hear whispering, soft, faint, like two people speaking from far away. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was tense, urgent, sending chills up my spine. I turned off the flashlight, held my breath, trying not to make a sound. The whispers grew clearer as I crept toward the corner of the aisle. I raised the flashlight, ready to face whoever was there. But when the light swept through, there was nothing. The aisle was empty, the whispers gone as if they'd never existed. I stood there, confused and disoriented. They had been right in front of me. How could they disappear so quickly? A strange feeling washed over me. I decided to forget everything and go straight to the breaker room to restore power. Enough was enough. I wasn't paid to play cat and mouse in the dark. As I fumbled with the breakers, a sharp scraping noise rang out from the nearby floor. I swung the flashlight around and its beam landed on a crowbar lying a few steps away. It hadn't been there before. I was certain. My heart pounded. Someone was here, and they weren't just trespassing. They might be dangerous. I shouted, my voice trembling, "I have a weapon! Show yourself!" Half true, since a stun baton wasn't much. But I didn't care anymore. I needed to get out. Just as I turned toward the main door, a loud clang echoed from the far end of the factory, followed by pounding footsteps. Adrenaline surged through me. Somehow, instead of running outside, I ran toward the noise, as if a primal instinct to protect my territory had taken over. I turned a corner, and there, two figures in black stood in the aisle. One held a crowbar identical to the one I'd seen. They looked at me, cold eyes glinting in the dark, then suddenly charged straight at me. I didn't think. I turned and ran. Their footsteps thundered behind me, echoing through the shelves. I weaved through aisles, using my familiarity with the factory to try and lose them. Sweat poured down despite the cold, my breath ragged. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps faded, then vanished. I stopped, leaned against a shelf, gasping. They weren't chasing me anymore. I stumbled to the emergency exit, pushed it open, and ran into the pouring rain. Immediately, I called the police. my voice shaking as I begged them to come quickly. The police arrived within 10 minutes, faster than I expected. They searched the factory, but the two men had vanished, leaving behind only a few pried-open crates and a lone crowbar on the floor. They helped me restore the power, but my boss wasn't pleased when he heard the report. He yelled at me for running, threatened to fire me, though I somehow kept my job. Since then, the company has assigned 2 guards for each night shift, but I can't forget that night. Those men were clearly toying with me, but when discovered, they were ready to attack. I don't know what they wanted: theft, sabotage, or something worse. I only know that every time I walk into the factory under the cover of darkness, I still hear those whispers echoing in my head, and my hand still grips the stun baton tight, as if they might appear at any moment. Beneath the windy hill, I never truly escaped the shadow of my older brother, Victor. It's not that I resented him. He was a respectable man, running a successful woodworking shop on the outskirts of the city, where rough logs transformed into elegant furniture under his skilled hands. Meanwhile, I, Daniel, spent the last 7 years trying to replicate his success by opening a small bicycle repair shop in a neighboring town. But the wheels never turned the way I wanted. Eventually, when debts piled up and my pride crumbled, I packed everything and returned to our old family home on Windy Hill, a place nestled among endless pine forests where the wind howled through the trees like an eternal symphony. Coming home at 32 was nothing I was proud of. I moved into the basement of the old wooden house my parents, Elias and Margaret, had built decades ago. The basement wasn't terrible. In fact, it felt like a little den just for me. There was a corner kitchen with an old gas stove, a small bathroom with cracked tile, a dusty desk where I once dreamed of writing novels, and a single bed pushed against the wall. In one corner, I still kept the old TV and game console from high school, now covered in memories more than dust. I rarely went upstairs, unless my mother called me for dinner or my father needed help fixing the lawnmower. Living down there, I felt like I bothered them less, and that helped dull the sting of feeling like a failure clinging to the past. One Saturday night, while my parents drove to town for a friend's 50th wedding anniversary, I stayed home alone. Outside, a violent storm erupted. Rain poured like silver arrows, piercing the night, while the wind roared through the pines, shaking the wooden frame of the house. I always liked storms like that. There was something magical about curling up under a blanket, listening to nature's fury from a place of safety. The basement was dark but warm, the sound of the rain creating a lullaby rhythm. I was ready to drift off to sleep, my body heavy and my mind hazy, when suddenly everything went black. The power cut out. The hum of the small desk fan stopped. The TV screen flickered and vanished, leaving me in complete darkness. I sighed, muttered a curse under my breath. The storm must have knocked out the power somewhere on the hill. For a moment, I considered going out to check the fuse box, but that thought quickly vanished. It was pouring outside, and I wasn't even sure where the fuse box was. Maybe in the garage, or somewhere in the firewood shed. Besides, I was too tired to care. I'll deal with it tomorrow, I told myself, pulling the blanket higher and trying to find sleep again. But then, amid the storm's growl, another sound echoed. A sharp, powerful thud, as if something had slammed into the basement window. My heart jumped. It wasn't a branch breaking. That sound had intent, weight, like a determined strike. I sat up straight, rubbed my eyes to shake off the sleep. Could a pine tree have fallen? If so, that was a bigger problem than a power outage. No matter how lazy I felt, I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed my phone from the desk, turned on the flashlight, and stepped across the cold wooden floor toward the nearest window. The basement was pitch black, lit only by the weak beam of my phone sweeping over familiar corners. Rain still lashed against the glass, thunder rolling in the distance. I raised my phone, aiming its light through the small window pane, and in that moment, I nearly screamed. A man's face was pressed against the glass, eyes wide and white, skin pale and slick with rain. He stared directly at me, his gaze cold and sharp as a knife. For a split second, when the flashlight beam hit him, he vanished, gone as quickly as a ghost into the night. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my phone. My heart pounded, breath caught in my throat. "What the hell?" I whispered, my mind reeling. I hadn't even begun to process what I saw when another sound broke the tension. Footsteps. Clear, deliberate, the floorboards above me creaked. Someone was in the house. In the storm, in the dark, I was no longer alone. And worse, the one at the window knew I was here. My mind spun, but there was no time for panic. I checked my phone. No signal. The basement was underground, and the blackout had cut off all communication. I was trapped, unable to call for help. The footsteps above grew louder, joined by faint whispers I couldn't quite make out. I knew only one thing. I had to act. Sitting here, waiting to die, wasn't an option. I decided to sneak upstairs, escape through the front door, and run to the neighbor's house half a mile away to get help. With shaky legs, I approached the staircase, trying to keep my breath steady and silent. Each step of the old wooden stairs groaned under my weight, despite my efforts to move quietly. At the top, I crouched behind the door leading into the living room and peeked out. In the dark, 3 figures moved slowly, their flashlight beams sweeping over the wooden walls and familiar furniture. My heart sank as one of the lights revealed one of them clearly. The tallest man held a pistol, the metal glinting under the light. I froze, barely daring to breathe. They whispered to each other, voices low and cold, until one phrase froze my blood. "Daniel's in the basement. Go get him." The voice was calm, almost emotionless, but it echoed in my head like a gunshot. How did they know my name? Who were they? I had no time to find out. They were coming for me. I backed down the stairs, quick but quiet, my mind racing for a way out. There was no place to hide in the basement. The closet was too small, under the bed too obvious. Only one option remained: the window. The small panes were locked from the inside, but I had no other choice. I ran to the corner of the room, grabbed an old stool, and climbed up to the window well. Without hesitation, I slammed my elbow into the glass. The shatter rang sharp, louder than the storm. Shards fell, slicing into my arm and shoulder, but I didn't feel pain. Adrenaline numbed everything. I squeezed through the gap, pulling myself out and falling onto the soaking grass below. Rain drenched my clothes in seconds. I stood, slipped in the mud, then ran into the darkness, past towering pine trees, never looking back. Once I was out of sight of the house, I checked my phone. Finally, a signal. My hands trembled so much I almost dropped it, but I dialed the police, stammering through my story. 20 minutes later, patrol cars arrived, headlights slicing through the rain. They swept the house, but the intruders were gone, leaving behind chaos, furniture overturned, my parents' safe pried open, and even my grandfather's antique clock missing. The police concluded the outage was deliberate. The external power line had been cut. I wasn't surprised, but it didn't ease the terror. My parents returned the next morning, furious and disappointed. My mother cried at the sight of the ransacked house, and my father yelled that I was a useless fool who couldn't even protect the home. I begged them not to throw me out, swore I'd done everything I could. Eventually, they calmed down, but their eyes held only disillusionment. I didn't blame them. I was disappointed in myself too. That night still haunts me. I don't know who those men were, how they knew my name, or what they wanted beyond theft. Maybe they were drifters from the woods who heard of me in town. Maybe I was their target all along. I'm not sure. But whenever the rain falls and the wind howls across Windy Hill, I curl under my blanket, listen, and wonder if they'll come back.